can I just say to you that this could be my last meeting as chairman, and therefore I would like it to go as smoothly as possible. Did you note that, officers? Yes. Thank you. So if we start with, we normally start with, I've lost it, I can't read it. To confirm the minutes of the meeting on the 27th of July. They have been laid on the table. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Apologies for absence, Fiona?
Thank you, Chairman. I've had apologies from Councillors Brian Ellis, Patricia Ellis and Peter Martin.
Thank you. Declarations of interest? No? Thank you. Questions by members of the public?
None, Chairman.
Okay. Right, item 5, service plans, year-end outturn report for 2015 and 16. Now, before we start on this one, can I just say, we have over the past few months made all sorts of points about the service plans and the outcomes, etc., etc. What you have in front of you is in fact a wrap-up of the old system. So all we're doing is wrapping up what we've done for 15-16, and then what we're going to do for 16-17 is a new format. We will be in discussion with the officers as to exactly what we want. So this, in a way, is for information. All right? Louise, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the Chairman has put this report into context, which is very helpful, and you will be seeing a 6-month progress on the current year service plan in November, which will have a very different format, and having listened to your views, we will ensure that there are outcomes, the terminology is as clear as possible, and it's as smart as possible. So please be assured that we have listened to what you've said. Happy to take any comments on the report otherwise.
To comment on the report? No? Are we all on the report page? Which is page 7. Okay, then in which case I'll put the recommendation. Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee is requested to scrutinise and agree any observations for 15-16 and outturn service plan. Is that agreed? But remember, we are going to do this in a different format. We have listened to what you have said as members. Thank you. Item 8, Treasury Management Activity. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. This report's one of our quarterly Treasury Management reports. It's reporting on the Treasury Management activity to the end of the first quarter. The gist of the report is that we're on track to meet the interest expectation in the budget of £600,000. We're achieving a good rate of return at the moment. So it's quite exceptional, really. It's 0.83%. We've got a target of 0.71, which is quite exceptionally higher than base rate at the moment. The underpinning of the Treasury Management strategy is based on security of investments first, then liquidity, and then return. So that's what the gist of the report is through the annexes reporting to us. And all's good at the moment, so there's nothing more to say, really.
Peter, that's excellent. We are performing above target, and that really is very good news. Any questions on what we have in front of us? Mike?
I was going to join you, Chairman, in congratulating our Treasury team and what they've been able to achieve. Clearly, the remainder of the year is likely to be somewhat more difficult. I mean, are there any particular issues which you feel you will be needing to address in the forthcoming months, recognising where base rate is now?
Peter?
The issue really is that the interest rate is indicated to go down potentially in November. For this year, we're not expecting an impact for this year purely because of the way the investments are actually structured at the moment. But it'll certainly be reflected in the forthcoming budget discussions that we'll be having in the next couple of months.
Very much. Anybody else, or do you want to come back, Mike?
Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you. Is that it? The recommendation is the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee notes the investment activity and performance to date in 2016-17 and agrees any observations. Well, we have none except one of congratulations. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Item 7, Performance Management Report, Quarter 1, 2016-17, page 39.
Thank you,
Please.
Thank you, Chairman. Following on from good performance, I'm happy to say that the first quarter of this financial year is looking pretty good. The performance indicators under this committee cover finance and resources and complaints. The processing of benefit new claims has... I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that. The performance on time taken to process benefit new claims has continued to improve and is the best performance for the last 3 years, which is excellent. The time taken to process support change events has increased slightly, but it's still within target, so that's good overall. On performance of invoices, your members will know that this is split into two. Those paid within 30 days has fallen. We do have a very high target for this this performance indicator at 99%, and it has fallen in the last quarter to 95.2. But I have to reassure members that despite this slight fall in performance, our suppliers do report that they're very happy with our performance. We are much better than a lot of organisations in payment terms, so to be paid within 30 days is pretty good. Some have a lot longer payment terms than that. However, the small and the percentage of invoices for small and local businesses has also fallen, but this one does remain within target. The performance of both these indicators have been affected by a slight downtime in the financial system through which all the invoices get paid. We've had an upgrade in that quarter, and that has affected the performance, so we're hoping that will improve again in the next quarter. Staff turnover rose in the first quarter. Now, staff turnover is one of those indicators where it's sort of, we call it this term Goldilocks, not too high, not too low. So again, we don't have a target for this one, but the turnover wasn't markedly high. The good news is that the working days lost due to sickness absence has improved to 1.25 days, and this compares very favourably with other people in the public sector. Lastly, complaints. The complaints at level 3, which are the ombudsman complaints, has reduced significantly from the last quarter, but interestingly compares very similarly to the equivalent quarter last year. There was a reduction in the total number of complaints received, and the response times has increased to 89%, which is an 8% increase over the last quarter, and is showing an upward trajectory, so that is good. Members may like to know that we're introducing a new IT system on complaints. There's going to be a complete overhaul in the way we handle the information on complaints, and we should hopefully, cross fingers, be going live in January with that, so we will feel a lot more confident about the way we handle the database on complaints. Thank you.
It's always nice to find an occasion to say nice things about officers, and to echo what I said at the community meeting, it's nice to see so much green, so well done, and I'm sure it will continue so.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess Christian and I occasionally play the good guy, bad guy act, and he's clearly doing the... I'm going to be the bad guy tonight. Well, maybe not.
Be gentle with the officers, please.
In subsequent items this evening, we're going to look at an efficiency plan. And in January, I think we're going to move on to approving new performance targets for the equivalent plan to this. So the comments I've got are related more to those than what we've got in front of us. But Louise made a good point about the the HR measures that we've got here, and I guess I was rather more alarmed by our turnover levels. At the rate of 5% a quarter, we're going to turn over the whole staff of the council in 5 years, which is not good. I don't know that's not going to happen because some departments are worse than others, but that kind of rings alarm bells to me, and I just wonder whether colleagues share that concern and whether we might be asking for either the leader, who I think holds the HR portfolio in the executive, or an officer to come and give us some thoughts about whether they consider it to be serious as well. Because 5%, that's actually a pretty large number, if I've read it right. And then the second point was around the sickness numbers. I looked at the sickness numbers, and there are a couple of comments about that. Firstly is that there's no breakout about what's actually industrial illness and what's more trivial or possibly more serious but non-related to our business illness. So I guess in the future it might be nice to know whether we're actually hurting our staff, because I do occasionally see people walking around the office with the elasticated bandage indicative of a repetitive strain. So it would be nice to know that number, see whether it's important. And the other thing is we've got an efficiency challenge. So I looked at the statistics put out by the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development. They produce a report annually on absence in industry, right the way across industry, and they categorise things. And they make some interesting comments. They say there's a considerable variation in absence levels across and within sectors. Average absence has increased most in the public sector, which is now 50% higher than the private sector. So this is last year's report. Nearly 3/4 of organisations believe it is possible to reduce employee absence, and 2/5 have a target in place to do so. And the third point is the overall median cost of absence per employee is around £550, which is quite a lot when you pass it right the way across our organisation. So the comments were, could we possibly break out industrial illness days to find out are we actually causing illness from the way we work in the office? I think that would be an interesting statistic for an organisation that does care about its employees and health and safety. And the fact that our metric at the moment is actually almost spot on the average over the last 10 quarters tends to suggest that we don't have an improvement target. We have a target to maintain what we've got now. So if we could do better than that, then maybe that £554 per employee could be reduced to £400. And across the number of employees we've got, that's a worthwhile saving. Off the top of my head, it comes out at about 2-3 employees a year. So I'll leave it that. To see whether colleagues think similarly that this is actually an area we might want to attack.
Thank you very much indeed. Mike.
Madam Chairman, two things. I wanted to talk about staff turnover. I see on the comments on staff turnover that I'm assuming included in the figures, are 11 existing staff taking up new positions at Waverley. Is it right that they should be included in staff turnover? Because if they do, it does produce a very different sort of picture. Retirements are retirement, so when you retire, and people reach a certain age, they reach a certain age. 9 people leaving for new jobs is the one that I would have been most interested in, and I just wonder whether and 10 existing staff taking up new positions, I don't take that as a problem, and I just wonder whether this target we could look at this target to see if we could rejig it to exclude existing staff taking up new appointments within the borough, because the whole purpose of this indicator, it seems to me, is people being dissatisfied and leaving, and that's the most important thing, and it might be slightly disguised if you include in it particularly the existing staff taking up new positions. because, you know, that's the first comment I want to make. The second one is on average working days lost due to sickness. I'm assuming that sickness is cyclical. In other words, more people are sick in the winter than they are in the summer. And if one looks, therefore, at comparing quarter one with quarter one a year before, it's not quite such good news as we're making out in our summary, in that, yes, for the last quarter three and quarter four, we got very close to or went just over the 1.25, but quarter one and quarter two last year, we were well below, and we're still below, but not quite so well below. You see what I mean? So, you know, I don't think there's complacency on the figures on quarter one, with the greatest respect.
Would the officers...
On the staff turnover, I think, Louise, you said the Goldilocks principle applies here as well, is that in an organisation you do want some level of turnover. You want an opportunity to bring in new ideas, you want to bring in a younger workforce. You'll know that our workforce is generally at the older end of the spectrum, and we have a big risk with a workforce that's on that side of the equation, because it means that in a relatively short period of time, lots of people will be retiring and will be losing knowledge. So we want some healthy turnover. There are going to be some posts in the council. Might be apprentices, it might be some of our more junior staff, where a higher turnover is quite normal. It doesn't mean that 5% will then impact on every member of staff, but some roles will have that by its very nature. Hugh will know that in housing not so long ago that the turnover was too high and we were losing much valued knowledge. But actually some of that turnover has been healthy, because as a result we've got some very good staff in with really good ideas from other organisations that they're able to now build on in terms of where we are in Waverley. I think we could do some more analysis. We could break out elements like staff who've been recruited internally. But it's the Goldilocks principle again, because that's a good thing. We're seeing staff progress. Often those are related to promotions. But if there's too much of that, then that creates disruption for the services that are losing the staff. And so it's kind of all horses for courses. And in a way, it is what it says on the tin. It's an indicator, and we need to then understand that there's some detail behind it that needs to be discussed and understood before we can make any firm conclusions. On the whole, this level of turnover is probably healthy, and certainly with the age profile of our workforce, we will automatically get a number of people retiring every year. And our job is not to stop that, because we can't. Our job is to make sure that we fill those gaps and we do knowledge transfer to make sure that the negative impact of that is minimised and the opportunities are maximised. In terms of sickness, we generally have a very good set of performance, and there's a lot that happens within the organisation to ensure that sickness levels are managed. But I do take the point that we've also got to make sure that the environment in which our staff work is a healthy environment. And only a few weeks ago, we sat down with all of our staff in the organisation. We held a staff conference, and the primary topic on that staff conference was their health and well-being. What would make a difference to what makes a difference now to their health and well-being? What does the council do now to support their health and well-being, which includes their physical health as well as their mental health? But most importantly, is there anything else the council could do in the future to improve upon that? And staff were very helpful in engaging positively in those conversations and coming up with new ideas to build on the work that we already have in place. I think generally the feedback from staff is that lots the council does already, but there, as always, there are opportunities to do more. I hope that's helpful.
Wish to add to that?
Sorry, Chairman, thank you. Just one point. The beauty of some indicators is that you can compare them with other organisations. My worry in taking out the internal, because basically people have gone for a new job. I mean, it is in sense turnover. It could equally have been someone from outside. It would prevent us, if we changed it forever, to stop us comparing with others. Certainly, we can add as much context as members would require. So that would be my only worry about that one.
Peter.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Really, Damien, Louise and Councillor Goodrich have already covered the points I was going to make, but some of the 9 people leaving for new jobs were going for promotion within their own specialisation, and that reflects, I think, rather well on Waverley because they train them up there, so surely that's good. But the 7 retirements, that's what happens, and the 7 existing staff who moved on, that's something else. And Damien's point about having new ideas in the last company I worked for, they had their IT department on 3-year contracts, whereas everyone else left school or university and retired from the company many, many years later. You were wedded to the company almost. But with the IT, they had them on 3-year contracts, so they could have new people in, new ideas, wear them out, let them go somewhere else. Was the way it was put. But no, I think the staff turnover should be viewed differently, the retirements and the people moving on. So all those points were answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Michael.
Thank you, Chairman. I think my comments on the staffing issues already been addressed, but let me come back to the finance, F3 and invoicing and the impact of the downturn in the performance of our IT systems. I mean, this is an important area. I mean, I'd like to be reassured that we have overcome this now, and have we learned lessons from it in terms of trialling our new systems before we actually make them go live. And I'm, again, slightly nervous to hear that when it comes to complaints, we've got a new IT system coming in, and are we going to be smack bang in the same problem, not having trialled a thing adequately to make sure it is really working and giving us the results we want before we actually launch it full blown on the whole system. So, but my real concern is where are we with our finance IT systems, and have we really cracked it?
Thank you very much. Who's going to take that? Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. I can give assurance that the upgrade was properly tested prior to go live. There was a little window of time that we actually had to close the system down and hold back on invoices so we could switch over from the previous system, or platform as we call it, to the new version. And therefore we had to hold back on invoice processing until we'd brought on stream the new version, and then we got on with it again. With a target of 99%, it leaves very little margin for error in terms of numbers of invoices coming through the system, and therefore we saw a slight dip because of the holding back of invoices until we switched over in business days to the new version. But it was properly tested, and things were done correctly in terms of doing the upgrade.
Thank you. Anybody else?
May I come back, Chairman?
Yes, sure.
I mean, it does seem to me that invoicing is such an important issue that we ought to be looking, if we're getting to do an upgrade, to try and find some way of running systems in parallel, or getting somebody else to process our invoices for us on a comparable system while we're doing this upgrade. If we can't manage it in working hours or over a weekend, then it does seem to me we have an obligation to find other ways of keeping our main systems up and running while the trial is going on with our new updated software.
Thank you. Mike, your point is well made, and I think officers have got the message on that. Graham.
Chairman, just to add that these particular PIs are as much about people as they are about systems, because we're relying on people to process an invoice and authorise it. So even if the system was, completely slick, we still need people to do that. And there are 2 or 3 stages in an authorisation process. So one of the things we do is weekly reminders to budget managers who authorise invoices of all the invoices that are sat outstanding for them, because the clock starts ticking when the invoice goes into the system, stops when the payment's made, and in between then 2 or 3 people are involved in that process. So as well as the system functioning properly, we also need the sort of the process involving the people too, and that's as much about sort of local management and raising the profile and the ownership of this particular task with our service managers and some of their admin staff who process invoices. So we try and cascade that message through, but occasionally, particularly in the summer, we take a sort of a temporary blip when there are fewer people around. But we do try and put arrangements in place where if you're an invoice authoriser, you're going to go off for a week, you can transfer the responsibility to someone else. So fairly small practical steps, but the figures are quite sensitive, and the performance can dip if we let a few invoices slip through, because we're not talking about thousands and thousands of invoices here. So it only takes a service area with high volume of invoices to have a vacancy or somebody on leave, and they haven't put proper backup arrangements in place, and our performance can drop 1% or 2%. So we're doing what we can to focus on the people as well as getting the systems robust, Chairman.
It's worth noting something that Louise said, that in actual fact, compared to some other authorities, our performance is very good. And therefore we mustn't get too hung up on it. And also that the performance target is quite challenging. I did suggest we might look at that if it's challenging, but the officers said no, let's leave the target as it is, because it's something to aim for. And I think there is a good point there. Peter.
Chairman, a question really for the officers. How many of the invoices that come in are in fact incomplete and therefore have to go around the system more than once while more information is sought?
There's a certain amount of invoices come in that we consider to be in dispute, so that there's something wrong with the invoice, either the work's not complete or the pricing or whatever it is. Those invoices aren't counted within this stat. We hold them separate to that.
Very, very much indeed. Anybody else? Oh, yes, sorry, Christian.
I suspect that despite the impressive dip in the curve on the diagram, I suspect that the impact was probably very minor. And I believe this subject has come up in the past, and at that time, if my memory serves me correctly, we discovered upon investigation that we were considering a very tiny delay to the purchase of the Rangers Wellington boots, and we realised that we were actually dealing with that sort of level of impact. So I just thought it was worth saying that we might be presenting a slightly gloomier picture than is actually warranted. I don't know if any of the officers want to support me in that thesis, but I suspect that we are doing quite well, and perhaps you might want to reinforce that for the record.
The Hess is right, because we did have this debate, and we were talking about very, very minute invoices. Any comment?
Chairman, absolutely. I mean, there's a range of values from the invoices that miss and miss the target, and a range of suppliers as well. But yes, so some of them. I mean, I'm looking at a list here from one of our weekly reports that come out. One of them's £33, and it was paid within 33 days rather than 30 days. So, I mean, it captures everything. But I mean, there was some larger ones, and potentially some of them actually were in dispute. But again, coming in back to the sort of the human factor, somebody should have put them into the category that Peter described, so that it stops the clock on those ones. But so they slip through. We try and educate people when that happens, and but that's the human part of the process, where we can only try and reinforce the message each month when we get these figures out.
Very much, Mike.
Just come back. I mean, I made my comment specifically in relation to the comment in the report that it was an IT problem. I mean, I'm the first to acknowledge we actually perform very well, and I realise it's a small change in numbers, but when I start to hear things about IT systems not performing, that's what the principle of my concern, not that the fact we fail to actually achieve a really very high percentage of invoicing, and we do, and when we moved on to the 10-day issue for our smaller suppliers, we were one of the first districts to actually do that and actually achieve it. So, I mean, I think officer, your team is still to be congratulated on your performance, but when you flag up IT problems, that's when I start to worry what is happening in introducing updates to our IT systems.
I always dread updates to IT systems.
Me too, on my own in particular.
Well, I bought a new printer the other day and couldn't make it work, so we all have IT problems in our own way. Anybody else? Can I thank the officers very much? One thought I have got to members, and that is, bearing in mind what we've been talking about on staff turnover and staff sickness, would you like a follow-up report in, say, 3 months' time on that particular issue? Yes? Is that agreed? Okay. Is that all right, officers? Could you do something? I think what would be helpful is to actually divide up the long-term sickness with the general sickness. Although you've got an overall figure, they are two different things. Okay? Thank you very much indeed. Can I put the recommendation then? It is recommended that the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee considers the performance figures for Q1 and agrees any observations or recommendations about performance. We've done that. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. If we move on to item 8, which is page 47. I think we've got a presentation here. Hugh, is that right?
I think first we could talk about the performance of housing. So
it's the Housing Service Performance Management Report, Q1 2016-17. Right. Hugh, would you like to take us...
a brief introduction?
Through? Yes.
So hopefully the committee agrees that this report reflects that the housing service is going from strength to strength with the support of this committee and the scrutiny of this committee and the subcommittee. The first thing I'd like to highlight is the voids. We have got to our 20 days target after a lot of effort and a lot of scrutiny by this committee. That's resulted in a huge efficiency in terms of rent loss, and what we've got to ensure, as the report says, we've got to make that performance business as usual and improve it even further. The other performance to highlight is the use of temporary accommodation for homeless people. That was 0 for the first quarter. For the year to date, we've had 4 families in temporary accommodation, but that was a maximum of 7 days for each family. Again, that's a fantastic performance, especially when we compare with our peers, the other boroughs and districts, and London specifically. Gas servicing is still a priority within the team. It's a constant thing that we're battling with. As of today, we've got 6 outstanding, but our processes are getting more slicker. The use of legal action is becoming more effective. So again, that's a performance to highlight that we're continuing to work hard on that area. So those are the and then the last area is the last 3 graphs around responsive repairs. And as we see that the performance or the data is the percentage satisfaction is a lot less than it has been in previously. And as I'm going to explain in my presentation, the method of collecting that data has radically changed. Before, it was all through the PDA of an operative. So we've discussed this many times at committees. That wasn't just an accurate way of collecting data. When you've got an elderly person who's got a 6'6" operative trying to get information from them, they're not going to criticise that operative more than likely. So we had a lot of tales about the operatives did the satisfaction surveys themselves, etc., etc. So with the performance of in the high 90s was just not believed, and it just did not help us drive improvement. And when we come on to the presentation, I will be demonstrating how this data now is helping to the real data now that we have is driving up performance. So I can understand if members are concerned with the lowest percentages, but when I move on to the presentation, I will reassure you that this is now the true picture. We can now drive up performance in these areas. That's all I've got to say.
It's interesting that making the change in the way that we collect customer satisfaction data has really made a huge difference to the service. And we're really quite pleased with that, Hugh, aren't we? But there's a lot of work gone into this one by the staff, and I think we need to because it's time to do their day job instead of helping our contractors. But it has worked extremely well. Any questions, members? Michael.
Madam Chairman, having been a pain in the proverbial about voids for meeting after meeting after meeting, I would like to be the first to congratulate the officers on getting it down to 20, which is really, to get it down from 52 a year ago down to 20 now is quite a large shift. And we know that the problems that existed in the last 12 months included things like asbestos and everything else that has delayed things which hadn't been, in, if you like, in the forecast of what had to be done from the time we take over a property and are able to re-let it. So I'd like to congratulate the officers, and while I'm congratulating them, to say I think it's amazing how this authority has so few people in temporary accommodation.
Yes.
I think it is absolutely amazing. I mean, we are a beacon for the southeast of England, if not further afield. I mean, it is brilliant. And I also note the situation over the responsive repairs and tradesmen arriving within the appointment slot. We knew for ages that the information we were getting was not reflected by the tenants panel whose information was different than the sort of 95 and 96 and 98% satisfaction. We knew it was wrong. Now that we know that it's wrong and we're getting more reliable information, as Hugh has said, it does enable us now to push things forward and try and get it to the targets that they should be. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, if you... Yes, John.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It may just be a malicious rumour, but I've heard it said in CRB quarters that Waverley exercises a method of encouraging homeless people to head north and report to Guildford. Is this true? Or is this just a rumour?
Chairman, the rules around the local authority's responsibility for homelessness is very clear, including making sure that those councils in which the resident resides is the council that is responsible for assessing and then dealing with the homelessness issue. Now there are lots of options available to our housing service in terms of how we support somebody who's homeless, and we certainly don't do anything that might incentivise someone's wish to present themselves as homeless in order to get further up the queue in terms of getting access to a council house. I think the council works positively with private sector landlords, works positively with other housing providers to make sure that better options are available than putting people in temporary accommodation that has the other effect, if you put someone in temporary accommodation, of significant cost to the council. And it's a fine balancing act because the council does need to respond and support people in genuine need, and it does appear that the housing staff are getting that balance right. But it's not just what they do, it's working in partnership with other organisations, including the private sector, landlords and housing providers more generally.
Does that answer your question?
I feel very reassured. I will go back and correct the rumour and collect data should it be found at variance. And I might come back on you, Damien. Thank you.
Well, I think it will be found at variance because I'm sure our officers are not telling us anything other than the truth.
I'd just like to say that it's a very brave decision to change metrics when you've got a high-performing metric and you suspect, as has happened with the last three measurements that you've applied here, when those metrics actually reduce. But I'd just like to say this is a really brave quality management position to take, and I think it's appropriate to recognise this on the record.
Very much indeed for that. That's very helpful. Anybody else? Then in which case I put the recommendation. Is that agreed? Thank you very much indeed. We have now moved on to item 9, delivering improvements in the responsive repairs contract for council homes. Hugh, over to you.
These are not all Mears contracts. There's a number of other contractors that won some of the contracts. They were all let in 2012 and they're due to end in 2019. So the council needs to consider the options beyond 2019. And it's not only looking at the performance of the contractors, but budgets that we've got going forward, and actually the contracts themselves. Are they fit for purpose? What the presentation is today is about alerting you to that and the help that we are going to require from you as members in terms of scrutiny. I am going to specifically concentrate on the responsive repairs contract. This is a contract that hasn't worked well, and we're going to have a look at the reasons for that. There are other contracts that are working reasonably well, and but we still need to review those contracts going forward to make a decision on what we're going to do at 2019. So, what's the situation? We've got 5,000 homes. We raise 15,000 responsive repair jobs a year. The average cost of a job is £120. So our budget for responsive repairs is £1.8 million. As I said, the contract was let in 2012. The contract's 7 years plus a 7 years extension. The contractor that won it is Mears. The start of the contract when I wasn't around, but the mobilisation wasn't great for a number of reasons, but we thought things were improving. And then we did a tenant satisfaction survey in 2015, and I think the results stunned us as officers, stunned the Housing Improvement Subcommittee, and we recognised that things weren't right. Because we had been receiving this data from Mears and their operatives giving satisfaction rates at 90, in the high 90s. What this tenant satisfaction survey told us, that there was only 68% satisfaction with repairs and maintenance overall, and only 71% satisfaction for the last repair. And what was happening, because service is so important to tenants, it was dragging down our overall satisfaction. So that was also below the benchmark. So it was a very critical time. We worked with the Housing Improvement Subcommittee and Mears to give them their due, came to the meetings, and we had a joint action plan. And one of the things that we agreed and was really pushed by the tenants and by the committee members, we need a proper way of measuring satisfaction. We need to know what the issues are. You know, the operative PDAs were just not working for us. So we jointly fund an independent satisfaction survey accompanied by Follitas. We went out for procurement, we tendered this, and they have resulted in a very good company that give us some really important data that we can drive up performance. As you see, the performance has gradually improved in the last couple of quarters, and we're now in this current quarter up to 88%. That's only just partly through September. So there is improvement, and I'm going to talk about the work we've been doing with Mears to improve. But what this has now shown us, as I was explaining before, has given us a real picture of where we are with the service and the satisfaction it's delivering. So we had joint action plan with Mears, and one of the key things was this satisfaction survey, independent satisfaction survey. And there was a number of other things that they agreed to, but it was still didn't deliver the results. There were still some issues. So we have gone through now onto a formal process with them, and I wrote a letter of concern in February 2016 to the Mears group following the prolonged poor performance. And the specific issues that we looked at was tenant satisfaction, the customer journey experience, time taken to complete a responsive repair, post-inspections being completed because they weren't carrying out even any post-inspections, we found out, prompt and accurate invoicing, and a review of the performance indicators. So in response, Mears provided an improvement action plan in March 2016. In June, we had a milestone contract meeting was held. We said that the performance was still not good enough, and we pushed it to another review meeting in October 2016 to again for them to deliver improvements. At the same time, we've had members support. The chairman personally met with Mears, with their regional director, and said, reinforced the kind of messages that I'm saying contractually, saying from a member point of view, representing the tenants, that the service that they're delivering is not good. Although they've made improvements, they have responded that this further improvements still need to be made. And really, I suppose it's all of us, senior management, myself, my team, members, constantly putting pressure on to improve their performance. So, if we had more time, we could probably go through this, but what the volunteer satisfaction survey is showing us is the customer journey, where there's high satisfaction, where we're doing things well, and when there's real low satisfaction. And generally what we're finding is just point of contact could be some improvements, but when they get to, when the job is done first time, there's high satisfaction. What really happens with when the job can't be completed first time? They need to get other parts. They need to more time. The satisfaction collapses, and I think this was due to lack of communication. It's probably justified why I can't get it repaired first time, but there wasn't any really follow-on. And one of the, by writing and highlighting this, Mears saw what the problem was and said, yeah, well, we need to phone the tenant immediately. They haven't had their repair first time. Give them the information, find out when it's convenient to go back to them. So even though they came up with this solution themselves, they said they were going to put in extra resources. They brought the extra resources in, but they didn't do that job, this key thing that they identified. So again, it's this push with Mears, is to get them to do things. We've now eventually, after, again, the chairman being involved, myself writing, strong letters, that we've got that in place. So what we're going to see, I think, we're going to pick up is the satisfaction with the people that don't get their repair completed first time. What also is interesting, when we eventually do get the operative to the job, and that's question 9, question 10, question 11, and question 12, generally the tenant is satisfied. So the actual repair thing, which we're here to do, is fine. It's the administrating and all the phone calls beforehand is causing the frustration. I mean, one of the stats from the report, and it hasn't really changed, is 8% of tenants said they had to ring up 6 times or had 6 telephone conversations before they got their repair done. So you could, we all know how frustrating that must be. So it's probably the operatives that drag up or pull up the overall satisfaction to 85%. So I know it's not completely comparing like to like with the overall tenant satisfaction survey, but there does seem to be some movement in terms of overall satisfaction. That last question 13, 85%. And thank you for the comments about being brave, about looking at this data. But this was the only way to use this new method of collecting data of satisfaction. Was the only way to bring improvements, to actually show the contractor, and I suppose show ourselves where the improvements need to be made. And that's what we had to do. And of course, it was this committee and the subcommittee that really helped with that process. So this is just really the points I've already covered. So one of the other issues is the time that they've taken to do repairs. I think when I started, the average time was, they're talking about 50 days. We're down to 18 days to complete a repair. It's still too long. We're still pressing them to do more improvements. To give them their due, they did bring in extra resources to clear backlogs and get to a sustainable position. But I think the key question going forward, when we have to make decisions whether we're going to extend this contract or not, can they sustain this level of performance going forward? And that's the kind of things that we're going to need to consider. The other key thing is the length of time waiting for appointments. That was considerably high, so people waiting 18, 19 days before they actually got an operative through their door. Of course, you can imagine the frustration of that. We're moving down. I think we've got 12 on the slide. I think the latest figures for last month, we were just nearly touching the 10 days. So again, to give them their due, they are improving in these areas. So one of the things that we found out, they weren't doing post-inspection. So to me, that demonstrated that their supervisors, who we're paying for, were not going out and inspecting, ensuring the quality, ensuring the health and safety of our tenants, and ensuring, I suppose, motivating the operatives. I mean, all of us like to see our line manager at some time. So there was all issues around that. I think we've got our post inspections now, and we've got a reflection of the quality of the work. A lot of the work at the beginning in terms of the subgroup was prompt and accurate invoicing, because one of the reasons the subcommittee really got involved was the overspend on responsive repairs a number of years ago, and this was all due to not knowing our financial position, late invoicing by NEARS. That's not us paying, we've had that discussion, it was about them invoicing us. And it's amazing that we've all had to put pressure on them to actually invoice us. And we've had a number of discussions about that. Again, that is improved, and we can't explain this. It's been us that's been pushing this constantly. And of course it's a concern, it's hard for budgeting, it's hard for forecasting, and it just causes a great confusion. Again, we pushed on that, and we're there currently 23 days from when a job's completed to they invoice us. It still seems a considerable length of time for a financial organisation. I think the KPIs, and we've been negotiating the KPIs again to drive in performance, and I think the ones in the contract were inadequate, and we're looking to bring those to the next, either here or to the housing subgroup, for your comments on those new KPIs, which are all about driving up performance. So one of the reasons, the reasons to drive, why we were looking to really drive up performance, is because, as I mentioned right at the beginning, the contracts are up for renewal in 2019. We need, and I'll show a timetable in a minute, we need to make those decisions in the next probably 6 months of where we're going with the contract, or having some idea, not with only this contract, but the other contracts. And so it's an enormous risk, us reprocuring, having a new contractor. You're going to have a TUPE, so you're going to have the same operatives in any case, probably the same management. All you're losing is a top structure if we re-tendered out and got a new contract. So there's all those risks. So I suppose what we've been, our sort of strategy, our action plan, is to drive MEAR's performance up so we can reduce those risks of the pre-procurement. But they do have to come along with the journey with us. So in our timetable, we believe we need, as officers and the ONS committee, need to come to a recommendation to extend or retender and then look for an executive council decision in 2017. And of course, this is just not this one route contract, it's all 9, what we're going to do with them, and it could be different things that we're going to do with different contracts. Some we could extend, some we could just actually not go forward with, and others we renegotiate or we reprocure. So there's a huge number of options. And in July, if we decide to go out to retender, so between July and December 2017, we'll be drafting a new contract. We'd need to consult with residents, how they see the service, and need residents being fully involved. When we've got our contract in place, we would go through the procurement process. That would involve the OJU. That could last up to September 2018. Go to council for award the contract in 2018. We have a mobilisation between November to March 2019, and we start a new contract in 2019. So you can see there's actually not a lot of leeway to make decisions in going forward. So and that's why there's been so much effort with MERS to push their performance, because it's so critical. But we are going to come to a crunch time in April where we've got to say if we're going to go with them or we're not. So really, I think the conclusion is there's some critical decisions to be made. I've been trying to improve MERS' performance with your support to reduce those hard decisions or make those decisions less hard. I mean, the stakes are high. It's not only very financial, it's our tenant satisfaction, it's our asset. We want our assets to be maintained correctly. So there's so many different things there that we've got to get this right. And really going forward, I'm looking for the support, the scrutiny from ONS. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Hugh. That was an excellent presentation. Just to say that the improvement in MERS' performance is due in no small measure to the scrutiny work that we did through the subcommittee. I met with MERS because, as far as I was concerned, we were not progressing the improvements as much as I felt we ought to have done. And despite all the hard work from Hugh and his team, it still left a lot to be desired. And I have to say, they came in to meet with me and the officers, and to say that we had a full and frank discussion on the matter is putting it mildly. I made it very clear that whilst I could not speak for members, I would be surprised unless their performance improved significantly, their contract would be renewed. However, they have made an effort, they are continuing to make an effort, but it is to do with the pressure being put on by Hugh and his team to get this going, and we will continue that pressure because I think we can achieve it. Immediately we put a lot of pressure on, in comes extra staff, and we actually achieve. But at the end of the day, whatever we do has got to be sustainable. It's no good then putting in extra staff. We say, that's fine, okay, we'll sign on the dotted line. And then they can't sustain it. And then we're back to where we were before. So this is a very important piece of work, which as a committee we will be taking through in the coming months. But, you know, the work that you have done has been absolutely excellent in getting to this stage, and the work that the team have done. So thank you, Hugh, to you and your team. Michael.
Can I thank Mr. Wagstaff for his excellent report and obviously from the Chairman's comments. Bearing in mind the conclusions of the report, where critical decisions have got to be made by April 2017, with a contract, I mean, there are lots of contracts, as has been mentioned, but one of them is worth 1.8 million approximately on the responsive repairs. It is a high stakes, as you've said. and that you require the support from this committee, it does seem to me that it would be helpful to the officers and also to the overview and scrutiny process if we set up an in-depth review panel or a group that can meet more frequently than this committee meets to support the journey between now and April 17. And I think it would be helpful to set up a panel or a group of, say, 6 people, including somebody from the tenants panel, so there would be 5 councillors and 1 panel representative to be set up. If I'm right, I think the situation is the executive allow us to form 2 groups. We've got one already, so we don't need the executive's permission to do this. The one thing, if members think this is a good idea, I don't think we can actually put names to the panel at this stage, because the committee is going to have a few changes after the next full council meeting, and therefore it would be wrong to set who should do it until the next meeting. But it seems to me that those members of this committee who are interested in being considered for this panel, if you agree to form it, we could notify Fiona about that. So, and obviously people who may join the committee after in the next cycle can also be included in that. So I just think it would be helpful, and I don't know whether other members of the committee think this would be good or not.
Michael, I think you probably need a second. I'm happy to second that.
You beat me to it, Chairman. I mean, I think it's a very sensible idea. Some really hard lessons have been learned, and it would be a shame to waste the knowledge that's gone into helping progress those lessons on a joint basis, from the ONS, working clearly very closely with officers. And it's a good example of members and officers working together, what can be achieved, bringing in expertise from both sides. So it would be a great shame to lose that, I think. And I think the idea of having a specialist working group, and I would suggest it even perhaps go beyond April, because there's a tight time scale beyond here. I'm not sure how these dates really pan out, but if there's serious intent to seriously consider retendering, then there needs to be adequate time in the programme to prepare the specification and to go through the tendering process. And I'm not clear from these brief dates here that there is sufficient time. I expect there is, because you probably recognise that, but it's a very important issue that to make the threat of retendering real, the programme has to be credible in terms of the work that's got to be done. So I think this little committee could actually assist beyond April in truth. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I know my Vice Chairman wishes to speak, but I'm going to take Peter next. Peter.
I was going to say, I thought the timetable was very, very tight in view of, because I was on the committee when we awarded the contract to Mears, and that was a long process. The tenants panel were involved. It went round and round and round. Hugh, I'm sure, knows what he's doing, but I think it's so tight that we can't afford to make a mistake with this big contract. And April is very close. It really is.
Yeah, well, I think to clarify 2 points. Firstly, I haven't got a sort of end time for this panel, and it clearly should go on as long as necessary, and so I wouldn't put a time end to it. The other one I wanted to clarify, in case I didn't make it clear, is I think this panel should look at all the contracts. Now, it may take only 5 minutes to look at some of them, and the response contract will take longer. So the purpose is to look at all the housing contracts that are renewable in 2019. So just to make it clear that the terms of reference would be that. So I think, and the panel should go on until such time as its work's been completed, whatever that may be. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that's right. And we mustn't lose sight. When we were doing our scrutiny work, there were a number of issues that we raised concerning the existing contract that we do need to look at for the future contract. John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I speak only from the experience of 2 level 3 complaints which reached my attention, one from Folly Hill and one from Bootsby Hill. And upon investigation of each of them, I liaised with Mr. Wagstaff over there. I would venture to suggest that one of the main weaknesses with Mears is that they subcontract so much of their work. And I suspect, unconfirmed, that they're subcontracting as well. They're weak on getting to grips with the survey at the beginning, and they seem to be inept, subcontractors, inept at actually getting on with the work. And that Mears seem to orbit at a management level, trying to control their subcontractors. I wonder whether anything could be done in your discussions with Mears to try and tie them down to a limited number of subcontractors who know what they're actually doing. I suspect they're shopping around. Just a practical point to consider.
When I met with Mears, I did actually address the issue of subcontractors. But it is very difficult because at the end of the day, they are a professional company. It is not really our job to tell them who to employ. Only when it goes wrong is it our job to say we have a problem. But I take your point, it has been registered with Mears and it will continue to be registered with Mears because if they employ subcontractors, they have got to be controlled and that is their job. Does that answer your question? We are on the case.
Yes, it's been with the building industry for 40, 50 years.
Oh yeah. You won't change it in the building industry, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I don't often speak at these events, but having some little experience in this field, I'm afraid is a great case of déjà vu for me, having experienced this in other places. I compliment the officers in pushing the contractor in the way they have, but the problem is it's a never-ending story, and whichever contract you employ is going to suffer the same problems. I note that it's taken Mears 4 years of their contract to come up to some standard level that is approaching satisfaction. They have another three years left as far as I can see. Perhaps they might get to a better percentage, but I couldn't see it, to be quite honest. And my only comment is I think we should be looking elsewhere to find another managing agent, which is what Mears are, that will be capable of taking this on in a more efficient manner, probably with an established procedure. I feel that, I feel that they've developed their management system as the contract has grown. They weren't ready to do it at the very outset of the contract. So, further to what's been said earlier, a great deal of thought has to be given, and the timescale does seem very tight. The only thing is, I couldn't look forward to another 7 years of Mears taking on. The extension would be shorter, in my view. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think it's too early to make those judgments. We need to let the group meet and talk with officers. We can't just take a judgment. I've sat through a number of different organisations over the years I've been on the council, and it's up to us to make sure the contractor performs. They know what's at risk. And in fact, it's interesting that in fact, when we first did the scrutiny, they had to write off a lot of money because we refused to pay it, because it was so old. So I think they're learning their lessons with us, that we're more tough than a lot of people.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. That was my point.
Yes, Richard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's been very clear from the conversation so far that there are two problems here. One's the contractor and the other one's the contract. Hugh did allude that there are problems with the contract, and you can see with some of the metrics failures to deliver that a tighter contract would have delivered that. My understanding is that we're a little on the short side in terms of professional support within the officers for procurement issues. I don't believe we actually have a procurement manager as such. A lot of the contracts are raised by officers themselves. Perhaps Hugh would care to comment, or Damien, about there's an element in this contract about rewriting the contract, and really my interest is how will we manage that. Thank you.
Damien?
Chairman, I think what's key around getting the best out of a contractor is a robust and thorough procurement process, and then a very strong client. I think the comments have been made already to ensure that contractor continues to deliver over time. And actually, in most cases, you're focused on achieving more from the contractor, because often when you bring a new contractor in, there's disruption. There's new IT systems to plug into. There's new staff practices. There's a number of issues. We call it mobilisation. Sometimes that mobilisation is meant to take 3 to 6 months, but actually it can take several years before you get to that optimum performance. Because the council has a number of contracts, and many of them are quite specialist, when we procure, if we were to re-procure this contract, we would normally buy in that specialist expertise around this part of the industry, and that would supplement the expertise that we have in-house. We have officers within housing, including myself, that have managed a number of large-scale procurement exercises, but we would still draw upon experts in the industry to make sure that our knowledge is absolutely up to date. In preparing the contract and negotiating the final terms, we can draw upon a very, very experienced legal team, but again, if we felt that we needed to buy in extra legal support, we would do so, but I'm not anticipating it at this stage. So it's a mixture of both.
Thank you very much indeed. Anybody else wishes to say anything? Then, in which case, if nobody else does, no officer, do you wish to add anything? Thank you. Then, shall we go to the recommendation, but it has got to include, Fiona, the setting up of the group. Okay? Is that agreed with everybody? Thank you very much indeed. To item 10, Budget Management Report. Now, before we start, item 9, paragraph 9 of that report, I am taking no debate on it because it is going to council for decision. And any debate that you wish to have should be had at full council. Okay? That's fine. However, I do have a note that Councillor Hyman wishes to make a statement. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm slightly concerned that items on the agenda are not in front of a scrutiny committee, are not up for scrutiny. But I do thank you for your indulgence and allowing me to speak anyway. I accept this is going to be debated at full council, but obviously that is no real substitute for proper scrutiny in advance. And I know residents are rather hoping that scrutiny v Street will be allowed, as it's long overdue and the lack of it's caused problems. But what I would like the committee to consider, I believe that the corporate overview and scrutiny should ask the executive to ensure that a couple of pieces of information are available at the council meeting. So I'm trying to be helpful here, having gone through all the documents. Firstly, in respect of the obtaining Crest Nicholson's agreement to pay half of the council's costs, which was misreported in the Herald a couple of weeks ago.
Mr. Hyman, I would ask you to be very careful that we don't go into any discussions in your statement which relate to the exempt annex.
No, absolutely, this is all this is in open, but I had asked and I'd spoken to Fiona, Committee Secretary, in advance and said I would like to go into exempt very briefly to explain why these couple of bits of information are needed. You're the Chairman, it's entirely up to you whether you allow that, but it is a couple of very brief matters. I've got a couple of paragraphs from the 24th of May.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hyman. I'm very happy to let you make a statement, and that's fine. There's no problem about that. But unless all members have copies of all the papers you're going to refer to, I will not allow us to go into exempt, because they are entitled to have sight of them. If you're going to do it for full council, then if you arrange for everybody to have the papers you're talking about, that will be fine. But otherwise, sorry, but do carry on.
Thank you. I did ask that papers be made available for this evening, actually, but obviously that's... let's hope that it can happen for council. Anyway, the other side is that we would... So firstly, we would need Crest's agreement to pay half of the council's legal costs, because that is what was agreed and hasn't been completed, and we'll need to know that at the council meeting in a month's time. And the second is that whether we should need a further council's legal opinion, which is more favourable than the one which we already have, in order to be able to make the decision that the executive are recommending. I don't argue with the £20,000 that's already been agreed with the executive. If there's a legal action going on, that we're going to have to pay the barristers for it. So obviously we understand that, there's no problem. But if we're going to turn this into a £250,000 initial sum, that's an awful lot of money which we can spend elsewhere if this isn't the right thing to do. If this is just financial attrition, and obviously we need to do what's right for the residents, I think the words prudence and probity, we do need to have that opinion and Crest's agreement before the council meeting, and I'd like this committee just to consider whether they would comment to the executive that we should have that information so that we can make the decision properly at council. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Very much indeed, Councillor. I have already said that I will not allow a debate on this item, therefore I'm going to move on. Do we have any comments about anything else within this report, except item 9, but your point is taken? Mr. Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it's always interesting to see these monthly budget management reports. I presume these figures, although it doesn't say so, are to the end of July, though it perhaps would be helpful if these budget reports actually set out when the financial data actually is for. One of our old chestnuts, our friends Building Control, I see are already, you might say, out of control. And it does seem to me this is a long-running saga, and I really would suggest, Madam Chairman, that as a committee we urge officers to come forward with some positive recommendation as to what we do for once and for all to put this matter to bed. It has been going on for far too long. Year after year, we find ourselves in a position where, very often, not as early as this in the year, that certainly before the half year is out, that Building Control is failing to meet its budget once again. So that would be an initial observation. There are other minor points, but I think we really need to wait to see the full half-year figures before we can make any more sensible comment on where we are going for the year as a whole. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. I concur with what you're saying. I seem to remember discussions here very much about building control, and I would hate it to have this continue. One of my comments generally about councils as a whole, whether it's this one or a parish council, they seem to take forever to sort something out. And it would be very nice if we speeded things up a bit so we could get on with other work that we need to do. You wanted to say something, Graham?
Thank you, Chairman. Completely agree on the building control front. It's been a long-standing issue, and Waverley employed a new building control business manager from the private sector nearly a year ago, and Jane's been running an improvement plan, been making some changes to the staff structure that members approved in February. And in fact, because building control comes under the remit of community overview and scrutiny, there was an improvement plan that Jane came and spoke to last Monday to community overview and scrutiny. So that committee has got it firmly on its radar. Clearly, if members of this committee, with the overlap into the financial position, wish to be involved too, we can talk to Fiona about how we can make that happen, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Anybody else? Peter.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Really, just to support Councillor Bandon and yourself that this has been a thorn in our flesh for a very long time, and we know that over a 3-year period they are supposed to break even, but they have not been achieving that, and I think it's high time we looked at the red numbers and did something about it. We can't go on in this day and age subsidising the system.
Thank you. I'd like to know why. I know this is not within our remit, but as we've got it in front of us, it would be useful to know why they're incapable of making money.
Chairman, I don't have Jane, who's the business manager's improvement plan in front of me, I'm afraid, so I don't have that detail. Would you like us to circulate it? I mean, because there are a number of factors that were detailed in there, and rather than me rely on my memory from last Monday, I think it would be better if we could circulate that to members of the committee, if that's okay with you, Chairman.
I do understand it doesn't come within our remit, but I think because we're looking at finance, I think we would be interested in why we're continuing to fail to get something sorted here. At least break even would help. So if you would you agree that, members?
Yes, Madam Chairman. I think, in addition to that, I think we do need, by the next time we meet, a real proposal, either that there is a genuine prospect of this break-even, or biting the bullet and canning it bluntly. I mean, I think we've got to get to that position. Maybe we should be looking for a joint venture with some outside body. Clearly, there are competitive pressures out there, which makes it extremely difficult for us to run a cost-effective service in this area. I mean, but the question I have is, do we really need to keep the service, or can we not work in conjunction with somebody outside and save us the sort of budget overruns which we're seeing year on year? It's going to be a difficult nettle to grasp, but I do think we ought to be seriously thinking about doing it.
Would you like that to be taken back as a message to the executive?
Yes.
Members?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll take that on board. Thank you very much. Anything else on the... It's mainly for noting, but if you have anything else... Good, then I'll put the recommendation that we debated the report with the exception of item 9, which is going to council, and we are concerned about building control, and we have asked for it to come back with some answers. Is that agreed, members?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to item 11, page 67. Graham.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I wanted to update the committee on a number of developments in the local government funding area. If I start with our revenue support grant, members may know that each year our revenue support grant is announced to us by the government, and that has been declining significantly over the years as the government's austerity measures have kicked in. And in fact, between 15-16 and the current year 16-17, we had a 52% reduction in our revenue support grant. The government made it clear a couple of years ago that they were looking to wind revenue support grant out completely. We used to receive about 2.8 million. Now we're down to 750,000. And the government indicated earlier in the year, in February, when they announced that in 17-18 we would drop to 60,000 from 765, and then 0 in the year after that. So these are the figures that we put into our medium-term financial plan that the council approved in February. Now, what the government then announced in February was that they were prepared to offer local authorities a 4-year grant settlement, with 16-17 being the first year of that 4-year period. And they were saying that this should offer more stability and certainty for local authorities. Now, what they did say in February was that they would be issuing some guidance in the summer. Now, actually, when it came to summer, there was some guidance starting to emerge from the professional bodies around the efficiency plan, which was part of the deal. But the government then said, we're not going to issue any more guidance. What we expect is a sort of a light touch efficiency plan that doesn't reinvent any wheel. It is drawn from your medium-term financial strategy headlines. And we want you to consider, each council, whether you want to accept the 4-year settlement. I've put in the report, Chairman, at the table at paragraph 3, what the government have set out, and as I said earlier, 765,000 down to zero over the next 2 years. And you'll see in 1920, at the moment, there's a figure, and the government said it's an indicative figure of a minus 800,000. Now, we did talk about this in the budget report that came through to members in February, and we've talked to the government about whether this is part of the lock-in, and they're pretty vague about it, because in 1920, that is when the government is introducing or hoping to introduce the new business rates, 100% to local government funding mechanism. Now, which I'll come on to in a second. And what they're saying is that that will basically reset the whole of 1920 and beyond, but they put this indicative figure in. What I'm proposing here, Chairman, and it's quite a hard sell to recommend that we accept an offer that reduces our grant to zero, but the having certainty around the position will help our financial planning, and that is perhaps a least worst option for us, in my view, and that will enable us to manage that risk out. And one of the reasons I say that is because in the letter that the government issued with this, and I included this as an annex, at the bottom, which is on page 72 of the agenda, it talks about the process for those who do not take up the offer. And the second paragraph there says that allocations could be subject to additional reductions depending on the fiscal climate and the need to make further savings, etc. So what that is saying quite clearly is if you lock in now, you have that certainty. If you don't, the only way it will go is down if the squeeze is on for government and their finances. Clearly, I've been speaking to other local authorities and meeting with my opposite numbers in the Surrey authorities and beyond, and indeed at the County Council, speaking to their treasurer. And the feeling at the moment is that everyone is going to accept the offer, or all of the Surrey authorities at least. But that most of them will accept it, but express their dissatisfaction at the principle that could be introduced, which is a negative grant. So my suggestion, Chairman, is that that is what Waverley does, and that we accept the 4-year settlement on the basis that it gives us a bit more certainty and a lower risk profile going forward, and we'll know what we're working with, but that we make it quite clear to the government that we do not accept the principle of a negative grant, and that in 1920, we really don't want to see a negative grant coming in, because that just isn't fair for local government, because we accept that self-sufficiency is a direction of travel that we have been put on, and accept that, but not if we're going to have grant clawed back from us. It's just not something we can sign up to. Chairman, the other two parts of this report, paragraph 6 on business rates, just a quick update for members. So the government's launched a consultation paper, which is quite a technical paper, high level, which we've responded to in conjunction with the other local authorities, or are about to. Now, what I've said in here, what we've seen so far in the government's announcements are that the whole notion of 100% of business rates being retained by the local government sector is one that local government welcome. However, the government will still have its objective of redistribution of funds around the country, and it's clear that this system of tariffs, whereby Waverley loses at the moment 12-13 million pounds of its 35 in a tariff, will still exist, and that the whole baseline will be reassessed, and the government will reassess what they refer to as our need. And so at the moment it is looking like we will come out of this with a similar position to now, whereby we collect £35 million of business rates and retain approximately £2 million. I can't see a different outcome from that based on what we've seen. And again, that is a view widely held by other authorities in this area. And the final thing I wanted to mention, Chairman, is paragraph 7, which is about new homes bonus. The government consulted on this early in 2016. This was about retaining new homes bonus as a funding source, which we were very pleased about, because at one point the government was saying last year that they might scrap that. However, the government were going to announce their proposals on the basis on the back of the outcome of the consultation before the summer recess, but they decided to defer that, and it still hasn't been announced. So I will keep the committee updated, because it's a very important source of income for the council. And whilst we don't rely on that to balance our budget, unlike a lot of councils do, we invest that in investor save schemes. It's still, really important money, and it sort of squares up with the approvals for new housing that this committee make in this chamber with its planning hat on. That's all I want to say by way of introduction. Thank you, Leader.
Graham, thank you very much indeed. It's really very disappointing. And I personally do support what you're saying, that we go for the 4-year, but we do actually tell them that we don't like it in very firm language. Michael.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it is an advantage to have certainty, particularly when we start the budget process and then about just before Christmas you're suddenly told, oh, well, you've assumed you're going to get X, but actually it's going to be X thousand or million less than, or tens of thousands less than you thought. And then, of course, it means a mad scramble to try and make the whole thing balance. So I think that there is a good case for having a 4-year plan, and clearly the likelihood is more pressures on the money rather than less pressures on government money. But what I do think is iniquitous, and one can think of lots of other words, for us to collect money from our council taxpayers so we can pay the government for other authorities further afield, in other words, a negative grant where we raise money and pay it to the government for them to use in local government, it is totally wrong. And I endorse entirely what you're saying about that, and we should resist at all costs, it seems to me. The principle, we're already doing it in the business rates. £33 million of money in this borough is going elsewhere, and that can't be right. And where would it end if we just get a bill each year for 21, 22 or 2021, it's over £1 million, then it's £1.5 million, and before we know what's happened, we're paying out what we received in the good old days when we got the full grant. But so I think we do need to make that clear, and it seems that the other authorities in Surrey, including Surrey, have the same view, and I think you're right in what you're proposing, but with that caveat that we're not going into a game of paying taxpayers' money from this borough to elsewhere. Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you. Well, the problem with this is you haven't got a 4-year agreement, have you? You've got a 3-year agreement, because the 4th year you don't know what's going on. So, I mean, I suspect that we've got no option but to go down this route, but it does seem to me we ought to be trying to encourage our other authorities to be a little bit more forceful on the 4th year issue. If this sort of so-called 800,000 reduction relates to the reform of the business rate funding, then I think we need to tie our agreement into some suggestion that the benefit of that will at least counter that negative reduction as an absolute minimum, counter that negative reduction. You know, like you, my suspicions is we'll get nothing out of the business rate reform whatsoever, because it'll be so constrained and written around words that we'll still end up billing people for it and getting no more than the 2 million we get at the moment. But I think we need to insist that you know, if we're going to go down this route, this last year, the negative has to be at least offset by benefits we accrue from the revisions to the business rate reform system. So that would be my suggestion as a starting point. So I think we need to, we may well not get it, but unless we ask, we haven't got a cat and hell's chance of going anywhere. I think we need to be a bit tougher. Instantly, you've got a nice typo. You've got pounds million in your column in paragraph 3. Don't let it worry you. I think we understand where you're coming from.
Mike, thank you very much. Anybody else wishes to? Yes, Richard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So totally supportive of everything that's been said about the grant position. Just comment really on the efficiency plan. So it's understood that it's high level is acceptable, but for a plan that's got to arrive at a saving of 2.67 million over 4 years, that number of 2.67 million is actually the only number in the plan. And I feel a little nervous. You've broken out. It's broken out where the savings are going to come from, but I don't know how much and I don't know when, and I feel rather nervous about that. Even if it's done in a very general level, that point X will deliver 500,000 to 1.5 million over a particular period. It gives the executive. It would give the executive a little more comfort about the plan. As it is, it's a long list of many things that we already do. And a desire in 4 years' time that somehow we'll have saved 2.67 million. So hopefully it's a comment of some merit. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the comment. And I wouldn't disagree. And actually, part of that is because the financial plan, the 4-year financial plan, already starts to address that, and this sort of supplements it. But there's also a sort of a principle here that if we present a position that this is we can just accept this and balance our books relatively easily. I think that which we absolutely can't, because actually we don't have the answers of how we're going to find the 3 million over the next 4 years. So I can't magic those solutions out. But actually, saying to the government, you can cut our grant, take us into negative grant, and we can quite easily cope with that, I think is not the right message. And it reflects reality, because we genuinely at this point do not know. And the next item on the agenda is one of the ways in which we're going to start looking at that. But I completely take the point that the answers aren't in here. It's a list of the areas that we're going to focus on. But it was trying to get the balance between having a high level plan and not having a magic bullet in this document that we're about to send off and accept a pretty dismal settlement, albeit it carries a bit of certainty alongside it.
The recommendation, we have made some observations to the executive, and we'll put those forward. Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you very much indeed. We move on to item 12. Now, this is a bit of a good news story, because you will remember that this committee invited the portfolio holder, Councillor Bolton, to come and talk to us about ways of investing and making money. And we suggested that, in fact, they set up an investment advisory board to see what we could do to improve our income. The executive have accepted that, and therefore, I think, Graham, you're going to talk about this particular item.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, I'll be very brief. I mean, as you say, this is something that members are very keen to see on the agenda. I'm very keen to get this taken through to Council in October to set it up. And this, members talked at the last meeting about, we need to get to the position where we are looking outside of our budgets to close our budget deficit, or our forecast budget deficit. And investment property is somewhere where local authorities have gone so far. Some set up companies, some have done it successfully without having to do so. Some start off without one and then gradually add one to their strategy. I think we can get this set up fairly quickly, Chairman, get it functioning, get some criteria in place and some advisors on board, get the delegations in place so that we can be pretty agile if opportunities come up. And hopefully, within the period of our financial strategy, we will be able to make some acquisitions that will start to boost our budget income. Thank you, Chairman.
Any comments from members? Then can I put the recommendation? Agreed. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to item 13. Are we on 13 or have I lost myself again? Item 13, which is the committee work programme. We've got the provisional work programme on page 83. There's a lot of business coming through. So we need to do a lot of work then, and some of the items from the Executive Forward programme may slip. So we'll have a look very carefully when the agenda is planned as to the items that we are taking. If there is anything you have identified as members you would like to see on the Forward programme, committee programme, then please let Fiona know. It's not just something we dream up, but it's something which all of you need to be a part of. So if you do that. Now, anybody got any comments about the programme we've got? Have we missed anything off that we think is something we're dying to see on there? No? Then, in which case, have we noted the Forward programme? But as I say, if you want anything on there, please let Fiona know and that will happen. We then move to item 14, which exclusion of press and public. I have no items that fall within this, and therefore, or issues to be considered and exempt, I declare the meeting closed. Can I just say, gentlemen, that this is well likely to be my last meeting. So thank you very much. I have enjoyed being your chairman for some years, for several years. And good luck in the future, but I will miss you all. And also to the officers who really have been very supportive to me as chairman, and particularly to Fiona. So thank you all very much indeed.